Hello and welcome back to Afterglow episode 58. I'm running a little late in this one, I do apologize. I had some real life stuff come up. But we're here now. We're going to check out another game. It came out in arcades. It came out for every console imaginable, and it's still coming out for those consoles today. But I want to focus on my first memories of this game, which is the ever-present Street Fighter 2. To this day, one of the most popular fighting games out there. Even though I believe they're on like Street Fighter 5 or Street Fighter 6, people still go back to Street Fighter 2. It's like considered the perfect fighting game, even to this day. Which is really, really wild to me. Although it is incredibly fun. I liked it whenever I was a kid. I came back to it as an adult, and still play it to this day. Absolutely love it. So we're going to listen to some music for the game before I get into my memories, kind of specifically of the Sega Genesis version, but we're going to go over everything I played. But, that being said, enjoy the music. Welcome back. So, like a lot of people, my first experience with Street Fighter 2 was in the arcade version. Not in an arcade, it was actually in a pizza shop, but they had an arcade machine set up, and they only had one machine, and it was Street Fighter 2. I didn't get to play it, I just got to watch the attract screen. But that was the first time I had seen the game. Whenever I did finally get to play the game, it was the original Super Nintendo version. They had it at a Walmart kiosk. They had a Super Nintendo set up with Street Fighter 2 in there, so I finally got to play it, and yeah, I had fun. It was really, really enjoyable. This is like, I want to say it was before I saw Mortal Kombat. Maybe it was before it came out, don't know. But I really, really liked it. But at the time, I had a Genesis. So I believe roughly maybe a year or two goes by, and I find a copy in the bargain bin of video games. And this is an opened copy. I believe it was at a Walmart or a Kmart. But I do remember it was just like this cardboard holder with a cartridge that pops in the middle of the cardboard holder, and it's just wrapped with saran wrap. So it's definitely a bargain bin game. Let's say I paid like $10 for it or something. But what I ended up getting was the Special Champion Edition of Street Fighter 2 for the Genesis. Now, this has some improvements over the original Street Fighter 2. For example, you can play as the bosses, which was a huge thing. Just to get 4 more playable characters was huge. I didn't even really care if they were bosses or not. I got 4 new characters I can choose from to play with. That alone multiplies the replay value of this game. On top of that, if you happen to be playing in Versus mode, you can choose the same character for both players if you want, which is a new thing. And then finally you had hyper fighting, which there's these stars in the main menu. You could speed up the game, you could slow it down, and really, you sped up the game. To me, at least, the original Street Fighter 2 plays a little too slow. But you add a few stars to it, get that speed up, and it turns into a smooth experience that feels really, really fluid. Now, you can go beyond that and just play at a sick, insane speed. But for me, I think I usually played on like maybe 6 stars, 6 or 7. And that seemed to be about the right fit for me. So I got this game back, and going to a hardware thing, which is kind of off the subject, but my controller was a Naki, N-A-K-I. But it was a fighter stick, which I got specifically for this game. But it's cool because the plug on it has a Super Nintendo plug and a Sega Genesis plug. You can use it on either console. But you had 6 buttons on it, so you could actually do your full 6-button stuff on the Sega Genesis, which was amazing. On top of that, you had your slow motion and your turbo switches, and they were on the middle, and you could switch it on or off per button, along with your slow motion mode at the top, which was just pausing and unpausing the game really quickly. And then you had a switch at the top to choose between the Genesis or the Super Nintendo. And a little hint for a lot of us from later on, the Genesis said Mega Drive underneath. And at the time, I had no clue what they meant by Mega Drive. But, of course, now we know it was the overseas version. So, because of this, I got to play the game as it was intended, with 6 buttons. Because if you're playing this game on the Sega Genesis on a 3-button controller, it is kind of miserable. Because if I remember right, you have to hit the start button to swap between punches and kicks. Whereas with a 6-button, you just got your top row for punches, your bottom row for kicks, and it works out great. So I would spend a lot of time playing this game. Later on, I'd also gotten the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat 1. So I had like the 2 best fighters of the time, in my opinion. And very rarely did I ever actually get someone to come over and play these on the Sega Genesis, because at the time, in my area, the Sega was kind of like the outlier. Everyone wanted to play the Super Nintendo version because it had more colors, and the sprites were a little bit bigger, and the audio was a little bit better. But I really, really enjoyed the Sega versions of these, especially Street Fighter 2. Because at the time, until it got re-released for the Super Nintendo under, I want to say, Super Street Fighter 2, you didn't get the features that were in the Genesis version. Eventually, the Super Nintendo did get them, however. So I would spend a lot of time fighting the computer, and at first I played on lower difficulties and kind of figured it out. Of course, whenever you play in lower difficulties, you don't get the ending for your character. You're like, you know, thanks for playing, and that's the end of it. But once you get the difficulty up high enough, you'll get the ending for the character that you chose. So I would go through and play through the story mode with all the characters to get all the endings for the game, because I wanted to see everything, you know? I wanted to get into the story of this game. I wanted to get into it so much that there ended up being a VHS Street Fighter 2 anime that I ended up renting. And to this day, this anime is amazing. You can find the full thing on YouTube these days if you want to watch it. It came out, I want to say, a year or 2 before or after the Street Fighter movie came out. But, yeah, the movie is nothing compared to the anime. The movie is dumb fun. I mean, it's not a great movie, but just for a dumb fun movie, you can sit and you can watch it and it's alright. The anime, though, absolutely nails everything. Like, it shows how awesome these characters are. It shows how insanely brutal M. Bison is. Just a fantastic anime, and I recommend, if you're a Street Fighter 2 fan and you haven't seen this anime, you gotta go watch it. But time goes on. I do enjoy my fighting games in that era. I ended up getting Tournament Fighters for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Super Nintendo down the road. And it's another fighter that I really got into. But again, I'm always drawn towards the mechanics of Street Fighter 2, as well as how the characters are almost perfectly balanced with each other. Enough so to where later on in life I am working at a Ponderosa, and there's another guy working there with me, and he's huge into Street Fighter 2 still. I'm like, yeah, I'll play ya. So we would go out, and he had the Super Nintendo version. We would spend half the night playing Street Fighter 2, trying to beat each other. He was a big Ryu guy. So he's throwing fireballs, and he loves that little foot sweep. And, of course, me, I would go in. Usually it's Chun-Li, because I really like the hyper kick that she did. But again, I wanted to play a more modern version, and eventually I get the Ultra Street Fighter 2 for the Nintendo Switch, which has enhanced graphics. You can play as Evil Ryu, which is kind of interesting. It was a really, really good version. But then finally, I'm like, I gotta play it the way it was meant to be played. I ended up getting the arcade 1-up, which has a bunch of versions of Street Fighter 2. Usually played Super Street Fighter 2. And again, absolutely great version of the game. It's the way it's meant to be played. Just you and a buddy on an arcade machine having at it. Although you also can't beat being able to kick back on the couch with a controller to play it. But again, if you're playing on that Genesis version, you really, really need to have that 6-button controller. 3-button does not do this game justice at all. But this game had so many different ports. Like, it came out on the 3DO. It came out for the PlayStation. I think every console generation has a version of Street Fighter 2 on it, which is... It just shows how good this game is, to be honest. A game that old can continually get re-releases and updates, and it doesn't really get old. People still buy it and play it. But that's it for my memories of this awesome fighting game. So we're going to play some more music before we go over the outro. Thank you for listening to another version of Afterglow. All the game music in this one came from the Sega Genesis Super Champion Edition. However, there's many more renditions. If you ever get the chance to check out the 3DO version of Guile's theme, it's absolutely amazing. Always worth a listen to, in my opinion. If you check the show notes underneath, there's a Discord if you want to come there and discuss games with me, along with other people that are on there. You can also check out the Patreon link and support the show for $1 a month if you want to do that and get a shout out at the end of every episode. Friends of the show include Retro Gaming Roundup, again one of the longest running podcasts out there, over 10 years now. Tons of interviews and top 10s. It's always worth going back and listening to. Secret Levels, who do one game an episode. They recently wrapped up a special thing they were doing, which was covering one game per letter of the alphabet. So now that they've wrapped it up, they're feeling the freedom to go do if they want. They're actually kind of thankful if that's done and over with. But if you go back and look through their back catalog now, you do have an alphabetical listing of games that they've reviewed, which is kind of cool. You can also check out the Lost and Gone podcast. He's getting ready to release another one fairly soon on Sunman, which I'm really looking forward to. So, that'll be it for Friends of the Show. As far as this show, our show logo and artwork is from TobyVonDoom from Secret Levels, and the intro and outro music is from Grim from the Lost and Gone podcast. Really hope you guys have enjoyed listening to this episode, and I will see you next time for another episode of Afterglow.